Hi, sister. I mustn't have talked about the feasts in my most recent videos because it feels like I always talk about not doing the feast, but no, we're not supposed to be doing the feast whilst in captivity. The way I want to kind of take this is just from a slightly different angle before just getting into prophecy and the Torah movement and things like that. So, God gives Israel these holy feasts, which means set apart feasts with the specific instructions on how to keep them. And in the book of Deuteronomy, by definition, means the second instruction. So this is like a fresh instruction, preparing Israel for entering into their inheritance. This is so important to us as Israel, the northern kingdom. And remember, the nation of Israel was split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was the northern 10 tribes. When they did the Ashtaroth pull, which was a Christmas tree, essentially, they were scattered into the Gentiles, interbred into the Gentiles, were told that they could repent, but never did. Therefore, the prophecy goes, Isaiah 44, that the spirit of the Israelite within the Gentiles in the flesh, is going to rise up in the latter days and remember the Holy Covenant. Now, the southern kingdom of Judah did the same sin as Israel, but they returned to the land. They repented and returned to the land, and they built the temple. So, again, the parable of the unjust steward, this is why Judah, one guy owes more than the other. One owes 50, one owes 80. And it's to do with the land of the inheritance, and that Judah had a big job to go and find the northern kingdom of Israel within the Gentiles. But instead they stole their inheritance, called themselves Israel, and called the Gentiles Gohim and things like that, and say that, they're not heirs with the Jews kind of thing. But anyway, so God gives these feasts to Israel. In Deuteronomy, the second instruction given in preparation for entering the inheritance. Why do you think he gives a second instruction? He's telling them this is how it's to be now when you enter your inheritance. So Israel got given the feast, and he says, only do these feasts in the land of your inheritance, more specifically in Jerusalem where I put my name. So being the northern kingdom of Israel that's within the Gentiles and in captivity, if you attempt to do his feasts not according to his instructions, you're actually not doing them, you're profaning them. And you're going to see this in Ezekiel 22 and Ezekiel 44. There's like a parallel with the unjust steward. So Ezekiel 22 is like the unjust steward that doesn't repent. And then Ezekiel 44 is the unjust steward that becomes just and repents. And he teaches the difference between the holy and the profane. So God's holy feasts are not to be profaned whilst in captivity. We write a check for half. Keep the covenants of promise, fulfill the royal law. Pass it on. That's the gospel. Now Judah obviously are in the land of their inheritance, and they are in Jerusalem, but this is why they owe 80. So it's like, yeah, they're in the land, they could do the feast, but what else is in the land? Idols. They've allowed idols in the land. They've got the names of false gods in their calendar. It's God doesn't hold us to that standard because we're in captivity. They're in his land where he put his name, and they've allowed these other gods in their calendars, and they're uttering the names of other gods, and they're tolerating idols. Therefore, doing the feasts, they can't even do the feasts because the land is polluted. And Yah's mad at this. Look at what's happening in Judea right now. It's not a coincidence. They also didn't go and find their lost brothers and sisters from Israel in the Gentile churches. They didn't teach them the law that never departed from them. So they're being punished for not executing judgment. They're being punished for not protecting Yah's land, and a number of other things. But the feast, there's a big warning in Hosea 8 to the people that actually wake up out of the northern kingdom, specifically in Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is an idiom for, it's like Ephraim, Babylon, it's America. It's this nation prophesied of in the latter days that's going to be leading the earth. This is where Satan's going to be cast down. They're the hammer of the earth, the most powerful nation in the earth. And it's talking about America. And look where the majority of the Torah movement is. It's in America. So the Torah movement rised up. They came out of the church. They saw that there was something wrong in the church. They were starting to obey. But what do? They start to envy Judah. This is all prophecy in Hosea. They start to envy Judah. They take the traditions of Judah. So they repent from the traditions of the Christians and the heathens. They repent from the Christmas tree and Easter and things like that. But then altars remain unto them to sin. So this is Hosea 8:11-14. So Ephraim made many altars to sin, Christmas and Easter. But when they repent from that, altars remain under them to sin. So you're like, what are these altars? Because it's not the pagan altars. And then it goes on to say, even so specifically, they sacrifice the sacrifice of my offering. This is Jehovah speaking. And they eat it. But the Lord accepts them not. He doesn't accept your attempt at his feast whilst in Ephraim. And he says, I have wrote to them the great things in my law, but they counted them as a strange thing. What's this talking about? First of all, Deuteronomy 12:16, the law, tells you the feast can only be done in the land of your inheritance where God puts his name in Jerusalem. So as the northern kingdom of Israel, we wait for New Jerusalem. So we wait for the kingdom to be restored. Yah is going to restore the feast. He's going to restore the calendar. He's going to restore the pure language. We don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about speaking a bastardized language such as English. We don't have to worry about figuring out the calendar. We don't have to worry about doing the feasts. That's not a requirement. Unjust steward, write a check for half. Keep the covenants of promise, the everlasting covenants within the Torah, and fulfill the royal law. This is literally the gospel. So that's like the biggest warning to Ephraim in Hosea 8. And he basically says, I've written unto them the great things of my law, and they've counted them as a strange thing. So there you go, Deuteronomy 12:16, where it tells them to only do the feasts in the land. But also, when you put Isaiah 66 and Isaiah 1 together, you'll see that God doesn't accept their solemn assembly. It's the same prophecies talking to the same people. And he says it's because your hands are full of blood. So another great thing in his law, in fact, the bullseye, the whole point that the Messiah came is Leviticus 19:15-18. So because the Torah movement will not fulfill the royal law and go and warn Israel, meaning the Christian church they came out of, they get this spiritual blindness and start to profane his feasts because they're cowards. They're not taking the calling. They were woken up and brought out of the church and were called to watch, meaning called to go back and warn the church that they came out of. But they wouldn't do it. So they get caught up doing God's feast and they bless themselves and they return to eat and drink with the drunkards of Ephraim, but they become even more proud, and it's a disgusting prophecy, honestly. But do you see the similarities to the Torah movement? They come out of the left. They are the northern kingdom of Israel, but they attach themselves to Judah because they're envying what Judah's doing. So they end up doing the same sins as Judah. You know, like profaning the feast days, doing Jewish traditions, and even, the main thing, not going to find their brothers and sisters. That was the main sin of Judah. They wouldn't execute judgment and go and find their lost brothers and sisters in the Gentiles. Instead, they hated them and actually withheld salvation from them and withheld the law from them. But yeah, I hope that helps. Daniel fasts over Passover. He's in Babylon, and he fasts over the Passover in Daniel 10. Read that. It's the day of Passover, and he fasts over it. And it says he's lamenting. He is in lamentation, mourning, and woe, which is an idiom for being a watchman. So in place of doing the feasts, you should be warning your neighbour to keep the Holy Covenant. So